So I'm Krishnapriya. I'm an artist and independent curator, and I've curated an exhibition called Bhin, Climate Change and Uncertain Livelihoods. This is an exhibition that has been on in Varija Art Gallery, which is in DakshinaChitra. And this exhibition has been around since the beginning of September. And in fact, this two-day symposium is an extension of the exhibition and sort of to bring some of these discussions into a more intimate discursive space. And that's really the idea that we're going to try and do over the next 2 days. So the two-day symposium in many ways is a continuation of the exhibition that attempts to address the issues around climate change. The exhibition source material is primarily from the People's Archive of Rural India, PARI, and I've made a careful selection of the extensive digital archive, transferring some of the digital material into physical prints, photo books, and as objects. This exhibition includes many acts of reading, critical reflections on the agrarian, curated by Annalisa Mansukini from the Foundation of Indian Contemporary Art. This is a project that was developed in conjunction with the Agri Forum, and you will all have an opportunity later today to listen to Anna's presentation, and you'll understand more about the Agri Forum project. And within Bhin exhibition, it is presented as an active reading room. I was also able to extend the discussion further by inviting local artists to respond to some of the pressing issues around climate change and related issues. In addition to the exhibition, we also attempted to activate parts of the climate change curriculum that the Marudam Farm School has put together. This is a curriculum that documents the foundation of environmental education, bringing various experiences of environmentalists and educators. Our key collaborators for this activation was the Tamil Nadu State Education Department. So on several Saturdays during the course of the exhibition, we had Marudam Farm School educators engage with government school students, temporarily transforming the exhibition space into an active classroom. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our collaborators, facilitators, and partners, DakshinaChitra and Anita Pottamkulam, for initiating the discussion on working with the People's Archive of Rural India and for inviting me. I would also like to thank PARI and Mr. Sainath for generously sharing their material. Muttamil from the State Education Department for taking the effort to organize for hundreds of students to participate in our programming efforts, and for Marudam Farm School for their enthusiastic involvement in facilitating the sessions. And finally, Arunana for putting together this two-day symposium. I would also like to thank all our other sponsors and contributors. In an attempt to start and continue the conversation around climate change as a provocation or as something for us to think about over the next 2 days, I would like to read a part of my curatorial note from the exhibition. Bhin, meaning numerous, is a new name given to the aggressive hybrid pests that ravage crops. A taxonomic identification by the Mawasi community in Madhya Pradesh's Tamya Tehsil. In the article Battle of the Bugs on Wings of Climate Change by Preeti David, published as part of the People's Archive of Rural India, she narrates a strange tale of insects across different geographical areas in India undergoing changes in behavior and triggering unpredictable patterns. This article documents observations by many Adivasi farmers experiencing these bizarre changes that they observe every day and attribute to the fast changing climate conditions. Climate crisis has numerous registers, and these are at present strongly being experienced by humans and non-humans across the globe. These can be read as a sequence of unfolding events that are leading to a wide loss of ecologies, livelihoods, and knowledge around collaborative survival. American anthropologist Anna Singh by saying, "What if, as I'm suggesting, precarity is a condition of our time?" Or, to put it in another way, what if our time is ripe for sensing precarity? What if precarity, indeterminacy, and what we imagine as trivial are the center of the systemicity that we seek. This opens a discourse about our time and questions our strengths, struggles, and wanting to maintain order of a certain kind. Grappling with this notion of what the trivial is within a continuing state of flux, a shift in perspective is asked for. Here in Bhin, the exhibition, we attempt to bring multiple testimonies, expressions to initiate these conversations, to ask if there is indeed more than one center, and in turn, numerous possibility to address the collective concerns about a drastically changing climate. And by voicing these, can we reimagine how we perceive labor, our shared resources, responsibilities, and actions? With that note, I'd like to invite you all to our two-day symposium. I would like to invite the speakers to share their thoughts and personal experiences and research, and hoping to have an alive, discursive, and contemplative 2 days. Thank you.
So a warm welcome to all of you. I'll just give you a small background of DakshinaChitra and why we place ourselves within this conversation. My name is Anita. I work as a director culture at DakshinaChitra. Opened in 1996, DakshinaChitra Museum shows the diversity of cultures through various historical houses from about 100 to 150 years, and they represent architectural styles seen through specific regions. We curate exhibitions in these homes, some to represent how people actually lived, and some going forward, as I would say in my last, to reflect the changes that are necessary in the way that we need to live in the coming years. DakshinaChitra has had an engagement with sustainability from the very beginning. DakshinaChitra's architect, Laurie Baker, a British architect, worked in India for over 50 years. The spatial conceptualization of DakshinaChitra encompasses Baker's construction techniques and reinforces his philosophy of empowering masons and craftspeople in the building process. In keeping with Mahatma Gandhi's tenet that a man should be able to build a house with materials found within 5 kilometers of his home, he was always conscious of traditional methods and sustainable practices to build energy efficient and low cost homes. All of the 19 houses that we have here at DakshinaChitra basically emanate from the philosophy that Laurie Baker brought at the inception of DakshinaChitra to inform us when we are going about, much after his passing, working on houses. These methods were usually tailored to suit both the climate and the available resources, as well as the skills and life patterns of the people. But now the message is really reinforced by us in multiple ways, even to ourselves at DakshinaChitra, through events like exhibitions and through all the outreach programs that we have done through the exhibition. In the current instance, in our newly opened Mopla house, which is the latest house that we have opened on the far left of the campus, it's a 120-year-old house from Calicut. We will have a permanent exhibition on climate change and will cover other aspects as well. I really want to thank Krishnapriya for this wonderful curatorial job, and more than that, her interest and her enthusiasm for activating various facets of the exhibition. I particularly want to thank Marudam and Forestway. I also want to thank ASAR, which is an organization from Bangalore, which really helped us to reach out to the Tamil Nadu Model School and to have very wonderful and invigorating sessions with them. So a warm welcome to all of you, and I'm sure it's going to be a very enriching and engaging experience. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Arun. Like Krishnapriya said, I put together this symposium. So if it flops, it can be laid on my head. So the thing is, when I off late don't have much faith in closed rooms and the spoken word. I would like to be out doing things, but a forum of this kind is very difficult to do that. So given the constraints, we said, let's try and engage with people who are acting, who are doing. So all the people who who will be speaking are people who are, actual action people, So hopefully that will make it alive. So the first action person is Deepika Ka. Like for me, I can only give up. I'm not good at this formal stuff, so I'll be informal. So the first time we met was 25 years ago, and I was a teacher in the Krishnamurti school, and I had gone with a bunch of students on the Auroville trip, and that's how I ended up meeting Bernard and Deepika. And since then, there's been this awe of all the things that they do. But for me, the key thing is that, when you think farmer or you think gardener, you think of people growing plants or, crops or whatever. One hadn't thought that soil can be grown, One hadn't thought of the concept at all that, you can start with a place which has no soil and then grow the soil, cultivate the soil and then cultivate the plants which on the soil, So it was quite amazing. So their place is called Pebble Garden. Basically, it's a garden full of pebbles, barely any soil, And in that place, the most amazing variety of vegetables and plants, and over the years they have collected all the indigenous varieties and all the interesting varieties. There's so much diversity in nature and so much diversity in man-made things like even agriculture, and all that comes alive. I mean, many of you have also visited, I think, and if you have not, you should. But so it's 25 years or plus 30 years, I guess, of work, not 30 years of work. And so Deepika will share with us her perspectives and about her work. Thank you for coming. I mean, I felt a little awkward asking her to come all the way from Pondicherry. I was feeling really wanting to call just from Chennai itself, and I said, no, you have to be there. So thank you for taking the time to come. Yeah.
Hello everyone, and thank you Arun for that nice informal introduction. I also like to be very informal in all my presentations. I feel comfortable and at ease, and let's keep it that way. The subject that uh, I kind of suggested that I would speak on is conservation and change in indigenous agriculture. Now, this is a kind of a reflective exercise for me, an analytical one, to try and understand the character of traditional agriculture. Now, this has come after 30 years of working on the land. I'm now trying to understand things from the past, to develop a perspective, a deeper perspective on our action and for the future. There are two paths that brought me to this subject, and I see this not as like that I'm presenting a scientific understanding or a conclusion with you, but it's an ongoing research, and I just want to share my observation and perspectives. So the two parts that brought me to try and understand the subject was, firstly, I've been involved in seed conservation and seed saving for, as Arun was saying, for the last 29 years. And I've been working to conserve and revive traditional varieties that are ideal for home gardens, varieties that have some outstanding qualities, but for some reason they are out of the commercial system. Many rare varieties of vegetables, many marginalized kind of fruits, or some herbs, they're nowhere to be seen in the market. So I discovered them because we came in contact with many organic farmers over the years, and from fields from different corners of the country we got some of these really outstanding varieties, like traditional bottle gourds of different shades which you almost don't see anymore. And I started growing them, multiplying their seeds, and trying to understand why are they not there anymore within our food system. Um, so in the course of that, in the course of this work of seed conservation, I tried to I obviously tried to understand the context, the original context in which all this diversity was developed in the traditional fields. Back then, what was the original context in which all this diversity developed? So this is how I came to the subject of trying to understand the character of traditional agriculture and what was that system which generated all this kind of outstanding phenomenal diversity. The second part that brought me to this subject of trying to understand indigenous agriculture is that, you know, as Arun was saying, I work on a desert, on a land where there's no soil, a land that has been so eroded. In fact, I think one person, Ravi Shankar, is here and would have the experience of having worked in the early years when we started. It's a land full of pebbles, a land where the topsoil has got eroded to such an extent that the surface is now a riverbed that flowed from a river that flowed 20 million years ago. So, all these years while trying to build up the soil, while trying to reintroduce all the native forests of that place, while trying to grow soil in order to make this kind of land fertile and cultivable again, because in the context of the country, there's 93 million hectares of land in our country that is affected by erosion in this similar kind of condition. So we have a total land mass of 329 million hectares, of which 93 million hectares, almost one third, is heavily eroded. So it's an issue like of concern whether we need to take up the restoration, eco-restoration of these lands, or is it the right way to work on high-tech solutions to feed us in the future? I mean, that's an issue. So all these years while working on this land, the question kept coming up in my mind: how did this land become a desert? Was it always a desert like this? Or did something happen and it became a desert like this? So, over the last few years, I've been trying to research on this subject, to dig into the past, to look at archaeological and historical evidence, to reconstruct the environmental and the social landscape of that region. And in that context, while doing that, while trying to figure out whether this place was a desert, and if not, then how did people live there? How did they survive there? Because right in the middle of Oroville, we have we have stone circles, archaeological monuments of quite an outstanding nature, with iron objects, bronze objects, terracotta figurines, a large number of very sophisticated and skilled artifacts. So it became very clear to me that in the past, people who lived there already had a very developed and sophisticated agriculture. They had figured out many things about how to live on a difficult terrain. So this was the other line that brought me to understanding, to try and understand the character and nature of indigenous agriculture. There are these two forces, the force of conservation and the force of change. Uh, this is a character of all living systems. If you think about it, the this ability to conserve life, to maintain, and the ability to adapt, to change, and to evolve. These are two seemingly contradictory forces. It almost looks as if conservation is something so static and that it excludes change, and that change is something so dynamic that it excludes conservation. And but if you keep reflecting on this and observe how things work in a natural system, you understand that Indian agriculture has in fact endured for so many centuries because these two forces of conservation and change are innate. They are built into its very nature. And this is what makes it really unique and outstanding when you compare it to modern agriculture. This combination of the forces of conservation and the ability to change and adapt and actually evolve. So, if we look at, for instance, just to introduce you to this idea, you look at any living system, like just take the a human being. From birth till adulthood, the body grows, right? And it's normally believed that once you've reached a certain height and you've reached adulthood, you don't grow taller anymore. That's the kind of, and then after that, it's just an issue of maintaining the body, right? It's just an issue of maintaining the body after that growth period is over. But if you actually look at it, the human body has got 30 trillion cells. And at any given time, whether it's a child or an adult or anybody, at any given time, even though you're just sitting down without moving, there are electrons which are spinning around the nucleus. And this whole dynamic state is happening all over your body. And it's also every day, I believe, 1% of all the cells in our body is replaced. And in 80 to 100 days, the entire body has new set of cells. So it's the equivalent of a new you after 80 to 100 days. So if you meet your friend after 10 years, then your friend has changed 35 times. It's not, you're not the same, but still you're the same. I don't know if you've heard of that famous song of Simon and Garfunkel, where there's this line, after changes upon changes, we are more or less the same, right? So this is a kind of profound idea to reflect on, and this maintaining ourselves and remaining in a healthy state of being through all kinds of environmental changes and pressures, whether it is an organism like a human being, a tree, or a bird, or even at a system level, like if you look at a forest, it is one ecosystem, right? It's the same nature of a forest. A forest endures because it has that ability to adapt. And this being in a state of healthy equilibrium is a highly dynamic process, and there's absolutely nothing static about it. There's all the time something happening. This is exactly how things work in a forest, and exactly how things have been so dynamic in Indian agriculture, despite all the derogatory remarks that were made in colonial times of farming being backward, the Indian farmer being lazy, or all these derogatory remarks. We have to understand that dynamism that was there in indigenous agriculture. Just to give you some examples, in 2011 we had this cyclone Thane. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it really, in all the 30 years that I have worked in Oroville, this cyclone Thane was devastating. And in the whole of, some Karpugam has come and helped, people have come and helped us, clear the mess. It was a terrible cyclone, and in the whole of Oroville area, lakhs of trees fell. So it was a very, very difficult time for us, because Oroville has, one of the outstanding achievements of Oroville is the eco-restoration, the re-greening and reforestation of Oroville. So after so many years of working in difficult conditions on eroded soil, then there's a cyclone and we have lakhs of trees that are fallen. So it was a very sad time, but it's one very, like, an amazing thing was, within 3 years, after 3 years of this cyclone, the forest regenerated so fast to a level that was much better than before the cyclone. This was a revelation for us, because we thought the losses were far more, but within 3 years of the cyclone, the forest, because forest has its own mechanism. It's also an intelligent system. And so what we noticed was big trees fell, and immediately all the smaller trees in the surrounding, which were kind of in the shadow of the big tree, all of them shot up with tremendous speed, tremendous rapidity. So we had far better regeneration 3 years after a terrible cyclone, and this showed us the resilience of a forest system. Yes, there are episodes of severe climatic disasters, but a forest has the mechanism to cope, and this is one of them. Even if you look at the like certain individual species, there is a very valuable tree that is one of the main trees in our forest. It's called Pterocarpus santallinus or red sandals. It's a very valuable tree because the wood is very prized. It's a red colored, highly medicinal wood. Now that tree, many of them broke, like thick trees. They just broke. They twisted and broke. Many of them actually just fell. Now the ones which actually just slowly collapsed and fell, what we noticed was that they had this incredible ability to start. So half the root system was exposed, and but they made a new root system. The roots that were still in the ground, a new root system developed, and from the base of the tree, a new trunk started growing and grew so fast that within 2-3 years we had a really nice tree back again. So it showed me that this is the coping mechanism of this tree. This is the way in which the tree as an organism deals with very difficult things like a cyclone, where we have heavy wind speeds and a lot of rain. Now, we think that plants don't have, actually, they are much more intelligent than we think. And many years ago, in 1995, I think, when I had just come to Oroville, we had the opportunity to listen to a very renowned agronomist who's from France, whose name is Claude Bourguignon. And he gave two fantastic lectures in Oroville, and they have been published in a book called Regenerating the Soil, which I don't know if it's still in print, but it was done by the Other India Press. Those few lectures and the translation of a book before that, they're really worth reading for anybody who's involved in practice of agriculture, to give you an insight into how things work in nature, soil biology, plants, and how to work with plants in the right way. Now he said this, that plants are much more intelligent than you think. They have the capacity to change the texture of the soil. Imagine that. They have the ability to change the texture of the soil. He says that uh, if you plant any plant which likes clay, but you plant it in a sandy soil, they analyzed the roots, they studied the roots in very great detail, and they found that what the plant does is it attracts near its roots, it attracts particles of clay. It has the ability to attract particles of clay. And the other side, if you grow a plant in very heavy clay, clay is actually, it prevents aeration, but all roots need air and water to circulate in order to take up the nutrients. So plants have the ability to produce sand-like elements. They produce what he calls calcium oxalate, which is a sandy kind of a particle, and those sandy particles are there all along the root system so that the plant can absorb nutrients and air and in a water solution. So this is the coping mechanism of plants. Actually, climate change is nothing really new. If we look historically, the Sangam literature, I'm sure you have heard of the Sangam literature. It has many references to drought, to monsoon failure, to tsunamis, floods, and cyclones. I mean, plenty of historical references to harsh climatic fluctuations in this region. In fact, that you heard of the Aintine, the five land classifications, Marudam, Mullai, can you tell me?
I don't know the actual names.
Kurunji, Marudam, Mullai, Nedal, and Palai. right? So these are like Kurinji is the mountainous tracts, Marudam are the fertile agricultural lands which have alluvial soil, Neidal are the seaside, the coastal areas right next to the sea, Mullai are the forest and grasslands, and the fifth one, the Palai, actually that text, the Tolkappiyam, does not consider Palai, which is desert, as a land classification because at that time there was no Palai. There were no deserts in the area, and it has been expressed that the desert is just a seasonal variation of the Kurunji and Mullai. So in summer, the forest and grasslands and the mountainous areas they become deserts because of the water shortage. So there is no actual classification of a desert. Um, Later, I mean, if you read other historical things like uh, when the French came to Pondicherry, there was a person named Rangapillai who was the interpreter for the French people, and in he wrote detailed diaries from around the mid 1700s till till the defeat. So in his diaries, he has mentioned, in detail, he's described the intensity of the cyclones. And he talks about in 1745, if I'm not wrong, he talks about a terrible cyclone when the water in Pondicherry was waist high. And when there were the corpses, the carcasses of cattle were floating in the water, and where birds and crows were floating in the water, about how and all the houses collapsed. A very, very severe cyclone which we haven't seen till today. He talks about this. In another place, he refers to two cyclones in 1 year. This is something phenomenal. Rarely, I mean, Bernard has been in Oroville for 50 years, and Thane was the first cyclone that they have seen of that intensity, which was devastating. But two cyclones in 1 year, I mean, that's something phenomenal. So I wonder when we talk about climate change, what kind of climate change? Is it a temperature fluctuation or more frequency of these kind of intense climatic events? Definitely in the past, these are very well documented, and in fact, we could study it and try to get out more information just to understand the pattern of this type of intense climatic events. So people had the wherewithal, despite all this, people have lived in this region for 2,500 years ago. People have lived, they made the stone circles, there was flourishing trade with Rome, very close to Pondicherry. Not just Rome, but the entire Mediterranean, the West Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, and connecting all the Indian Ocean, the Indian coast with Southeast Asia and China. There was very, very big flourishing trade, which is very nicely documented beautifully in the Sangam poems, about horses coming from Arabia. And the people who were involved in that trade with Arabian countries being very prosperous. So imagine at that time, and there's even a mural in one of the temples of the ships with horses coming from Arabia. So very beautiful descriptions in the Sangam literature. It's really worth studying to understand the environment and social landscape of like 2000 years ago. People had despite all this, people have lived, and we can see it even now. You regularly see wherever there are, like in Brahmaputra, almost every year we see the floodplains. In Assam, every year the villages get flooded and they have to leave in boats with one small bundle of belongings. This kind of thing is very common. We see this, and then the next year again they are back to their agriculture as if nothing has happened. Archaeologically, I have a friend who has studied this in the northeast and all, that there have been like repeated things of this type of events, and then people get back. So people had the ability, that wherewithal, they had that resilience to deal with this kind of thing. Once I traveled from Chennai to Kolkata by train, and the train passed through, northern Andhra Pradesh and Odisha, which had just been hit by a super cyclone. Everything was pell-mell, the scene that you could see on the train. All the electric posts gone, all the crops flattened, many trees fallen. And when I reached my destination and talked to some of the people saying, how do you feel like about this kind of devastation? They said, no, we are used to it. In fact, it's okay because next year our crop will be very good because of the organic matter that will be recycled back into the soil. The next year's crop will be very good. This type of resilience is, people had this thing, and even after the Thane cyclone, I remember very clearly. You don't know what to do when everywhere there are trees fallen and you're a bit paralyzed by all this. And so you immediately start cutting the trees to make a path to move and all that. And we had a few Western volunteers who didn't know what to do. They were just waiting for help. But this isn't the Indian, the mindset. You just start doing something. And all the vendors on the roadside, they had lost all their shelters, all their, the huts that they had built, everything had collapsed. Within like an hour of the cyclone subsiding, they were all back there putting everything back together, collecting all the stuff and salvaging things. Now, this is the resilience that I'm talking, which is in people as well as in the agriculture system that they lived by. Now, another very interesting thing which was raised by Claude Bourguignon back then, 30 years ago in that talk, is that, and I would like to read this to you because it isn't me saying this, I'm saying it because I've heard it from other people. He says, it is generally believed that the increase in world temperatures is due to an increase in carbon dioxide emissions. This is not so. The problem is more a result of increased desertification. The growth of areas where no photosynthesis can take place. The growth of areas where no photosynthesis takes place anymore. Every year, 20 million hectares of land are lost to expanding deserts. The problem of the increase in world temperatures is thus directly connected to desertification and not to cars or to the industry. And he gives this an example of a story from a legend, a French legend, in which there's a plague in the forest. It's a legend. There's a plague in the forest, and the king of the forest, the lion, calls for a meeting, and he says, who's responsible for this plague? And everybody, all the animals who gather, the crocodile says, no, I have not done anything. The elephant says, no, it's not me. And after all this kind of, a survey, they finally see a donkey who's keeping quiet, and everybody jumps on the donkey and say, you're the one, and they try to kill the donkey. So, this is exactly what we do, he says. We blame the cars for the destruction of our atmosphere. This is absurd because the real reason, the actual reason is that we destroy our vegetation. Now, personally, I'm convinced that you can't do anything about climate, but you can create a forest and you can change that climate. You can see it instantly. If you cut forests, if you cut all the trees around, you will have instant climate change, right? You won't be able to sit here anymore. So this is just logic. And but there are experts who believe in this. That doesn't mean to say that there is no place for finding alternate fuels or using bullock carts, for instance. I mean, there are so many options, far better than using fossil fuel because there's an end to that. So what was it in traditional agriculture that enabled people to deal with these climatic fluctuations? How did they deal with it in agriculture? Because everybody is worried that crops will not grow, temperatures are rising, or there's so much monsoon failure. How did they traditionally deal with this kind of a thing? There were two things. I mean, this is my understanding and it's an ongoing research. I hope to develop these ideas in future. one of the critical tools or uh, the strategy in traditional agriculture to deal with these variations in climate was crop diversity. And the second is landscape ecology. So let's just look at these two things. You know, the crop diversity is something that everybody knows. I think there are people going to speak about that now after me, about this incredible crop diversity that was part of traditional agriculture. And even I'm a seed conserver, and we have, there's a very lively seed conservation movement in the country to try and revive all these old varieties. But the context in which this diversity was developed, that's what we need to look at a little bit. Um, if we again, in the Sangam literature, there's a very beautiful anthology called the Perumpana Tripade, and in that there is a poet who travels, in fact this area, the northern part of Arcot, the area that is called Tondai Mandala, and he travels through different terrain, and the descriptions are really beautiful. I would just like to share a few to understand how crops emerged from the land. There were certain crops suited for certain types of land. So he talks about the Mullai lands, which are the forests and the grasslands. And in those forests and grasslands, the hunter-gatherers, he describes their life. What were they doing? And the women of these communities were out in the fields collecting grass grain from the sand, and which I suppose is collecting grass grains from ant holes or from rodent holes. And the men were skilled in hunting boar and hare, and the poet says that if you go to their homes as a guest, you will be served bold upland paddy, where the grains are like the seeds of the wild date. Have you seen the wild date? It's a really big seed. So they had bold upland paddy which looked like the seed of the wild date. And very interesting is they would serve you bold upland paddy with a poriel of monitor lizard. Because in these forests, monitor lizard is a very important, it's a very outstanding wildlife. And we see this in Oroville. So monitor lizard, bold upland paddy, and one little detail to show you how subtle these poems are. He says they will serve you bold upland rice with monitor lizard poriel, but they cover up the rice with the poriel because they don't want you to see that bold rice. In a sense, they are embarrassed because it's bold, because there are other people, like in the Marudam lands, they have very fine rice. So it's very nice to see the subtlety of this poetry. The pastoralists who also were there in the Mullai lands, because it is grassland and forest, the pastoralists, they grew rain-fed crops like varagu, and you would get, if you go to one of their homes and settlements, you would get short-stemmed varagu. It's very clearly written, short-stemmed varagu, with a pulku made with white avare beans. Very clear. This is what they ate. And you would also get tinai cooked with milk. So every region has its own wildlife, its own food, its own trees. The people lived in unique kind of houses which were suited to that kind of a landscape and terrain. All life emerged from the land. And there can be nothing more ecological than this kind of a landscape description. The Marudam areas or the lowlands, where you will get white rice with nati chicken. And they describe the sugarcane mills. That's also a very interesting thing. They describe the sugarcane mills turning all the time, and where if you go, you can drink as much sugarcane juice as you want. Now, this is a very interesting thing that sugarcane is mentioned, because sugarcane is actually an introduced crop. When it was introduced, we don't know, but already by the Sangam time, it was a part of and parcel of life. If you go to the homes of the fishermen near the ponds, the inland ponds, you will get fresh roasted fish and rice liquor, which is seasoned rice liquor, like preserved and kept for a long time. And he also describes the settlements of the Brahmins, and where you will get perfectly cooked rice with a very nice dish, a dish made of pomegranate, madilam, very clearly mentioned, a dish made of pomegranate with buttermilk, spiced with pepper and curry leaf, and vadumanga pickle. So just look at the detail, the graphic detail of how people in different regions, different areas, different ecological niches, how they lived their life, which was so unique and special and emerging from the land. On the seashore, the people were much more wealthy because they were involved in trade, and it is that in that those boats with the horses from Arabia that is mentioned, and they reared pigs which were really fat, and the pigs were fed with flour. So everywhere this shows like the diversity of the land and the diversity, and it's in a small region, just this Tondai Mandalam area. When we come to the British times, the British and maybe possibly even the French, but I can't read French, so I can't dig into those sources. For instance, Francis Buchanan was a Scottish physician who was commissioned by the East India Company to survey the areas that were under Tipu Sultan. After the defeat of Tipu Sultan, they called him to survey the areas, and he started in 1799, but in 1807 he produced 3 big volumes which describe his journey from Madras to Karnataka, all the domains of Tipu Sultan. And he talks about there's a lot to discover in this, but I'm only telling you what I have found right now. You could take it up on your own as a project. Just take up the work of Francis Buchanan and try to find out what are the things about agriculture that he describes. It could be a really, really interesting project. He talks about the rain-fed fields, and this is in around the Hosur area. He talks about the rain-fed fields where ragi is the staple food. But ragi is never grown as a single crop. It's always combined with a legume. And he explains this really well, that in those areas, ragi is combined, and every 6 feet there is a line of a leguminous plant like tur, pigeon pea. There's a line of pigeon pea and avare. So every 6 feet there are there's this alleys where there's ragi, and there's this, and the logic of that is not just that you eat, you need ragi and you need dal, but it is also climatic, because if the rain fails, if there is scanty monsoon, then the ragi will not do well, but the tovare will pick up, the tur will pick up, and you will definitely have something from that field. And if you look at it the other way, if the rain is very good in 1 year, then the ragi will grow so well, but the pulses will be a little poor. But you have a fantastic crop of ragi. So all the crop combinations that you see in all the rain-fed lands had this logic of not just providing things that you need, but given the fact that monsoons are unpredictable, this was a big guarantee. These crop combinations were a very big guarantee that people will get something or the other. In tribal areas, I had been to a tribal area in Orissa, and they have a fabulous practice on the hill slopes. They do a very minimal cultivation of the hill slopes. It's all done by hand. They can't even take any cattle to plow over there. They prepare the field in a very rough way, cutting down the branches of some of the trees, and then they broadcast the seeds of 54 crops. 54 crops all at the same time. They broadcast seeds of 54 crops and everything at the same time. From 30th day onwards, they start harvesting. So they have crops which mature from 30 days on to 6 months. So, and because of this big combination, they could deal with all the fluctuations in climate. I've seen the same in Vidarbha. You know that Vidarbha area has uh, monocultures of oranges now. All the Kamlaparam coming in our markets now is coming from that area, from the black soil areas of Vidarbha. But before these were introduced as cash crops, there was subsistence, very rich subsistence agriculture there, and they also grew more than 21 different crops in the same field, and which included cereals, pulses, oil seeds, and some vegetables. And no matter what, the variations in the climate and rainfall, something or the other, a pretty good something or the other, would be harvested from these fields. I've also seen in Hosur, the same area that Francis Buchanan talks about. I have seen actually more than just ragi and togore. I've seen many, many crops. Like in the alleys, I've seen togore, I've seen sorghum and cowpea and oilseed, this Niger all around, and in between ragi and green gram. So I've seen these kind of combinations. This is for rain-fed areas. In our area, there was a pattern, there is a pattern still, but the agriculture is hardly there now, of growing in the southwest monsoon kambu with groundnut, and in the northeast monsoon, ragi with ulandu. You know, in 1878, the collector of South Arcot, a person named Garstin, he describes, this is 1878, he describes that there were 40 varieties of rice grown in South Arcot district. And he describes some of them. For instance, he says, there is a variety called Pultikar, which is grown on the uplands in very poor soils with very minimal work. Just one plowing and they broadcast the seeds. It's a variety called Pultika, can grow 100% rain fed. He also mentions Pani Kambu. It's a variety of kambu, which is bajra, pearl millet, which is grown after the monsoon with just the dew. So you see how they had so many varieties to grow in different kinds of conditions. Very interesting. There are other descriptions of 8 varieties of kambu and 8 varieties of sorghum, of which we don't have information on what was unique about all these varieties. But he describes 4 varieties of paddy which were grown inside the tank beds. Just imagine this. You've seen the Aries, yeah, you've seen these water harvesting bodies. There were 4 varieties of paddy which were developed by farmers, which have the ability to grow in that flooded condition and to make very long stems from 3 to 9 feet. They keep growing as the level of the water rises in the tank, and they finally make their earheads on top. And so you have to go in a small raft to collect the earheads. I had heard this about Kerala, but this is the first time that I read about this in South Arcot district. And Bernard, who has been in Oroville for a very long time, has even seen this in some of the tanks behind Oroville. He has seen these varieties that grow in the tank bed. Later on, another person named W. Francis in 1906 was a civil servant. He also describes in very great detail all the kinds of paddy that were grown in South Arcot. And he says very clearly that the varieties vary from taluk to taluk, and the soil conditions of each locality suit some better than the others. So this diversity was not just like, not just like many kinds of jam that you get in a supermarket. This had a meaning to it. It had an ecological place. It was used for a specific. They helped the people to adapt to climatic fluctuations. And the other detail is like there are two types of paddy, kar and samba, with two seasonal things. But the diversity was so much, and in many ways, like duration, there are paddy where I think some of Subhashini can tell you more about that. 60 days duration paddy is there, and 180 days duration paddy is there. And people use this, like if the rain was late, they know that they don't have that much of, they will not be able to grow this variety. They take a decision to grow something else, and they maintain these varieties very that is very critical, and that in fact is something we need to acknowledge as seed conservers today, that people maintain these varieties for that quality. So if for instance they wanted to keep the long stem, the ones growing in the tank bed, they would grow it in the tank bed and collect the seeds from that condition. They're not going to take that seed and grow it in a normal field because it will lose its character of having that ability to keep making a long stem. So that is something as seed savers we need to be aware of, because much of our seed conservation work is ex situ. We are not recreating that environment in those where these varieties developed. In 1893, the British started sending agriculture officers, specialists. They sent a person named Walker. He was a chemist from the Royal Agricultural Society of England, and they wanted him to come up with a proposal to improve Indian agriculture. And so he has written, there's a whole Volcker report which is quite very revealing, but more or less he comes up with some suggestions, but in the end he says, I do not share the opinions that Indian agriculture is as a whole primitive and backward, but I believe that in many parts there is little or nothing that can be improved. So there was a big push to improve Indian agriculture, to make it profitable, to develop Indian agriculture and get this primitive peasant out of that setting. Because, and why was this? In 1869 the Suez Canal opened. And after the opening of the Suez Canal, it made navigation much easier. It reduced the time required for the boats to go, to ships to go to Europe. And so there was this urgency that we have this possibility now to, economic development. And that was the reason why these people were sent to figure out how to improve agriculture, how to make it profitable. I want to tell you one thing about, before we go to the landscape ecology, it will be a very short thing, about the productivity of Indian agriculture. So there was a general belief that agricultural productivity needs to be improved and profitability needs to be improved. But there's an interesting, a very old study by Dharampal and later Bajaj and Srinivas they studied the data which was collected between 1762 and 1766 by a person named Thomas Barnard. And in the Chengalpet area, it was a very big survey, and all the details of that survey still exist in the Madras archives in handwritten form. They studied more than 2,000 locations, 800 villages, data of productivity data from 800 villages. And I mean, there's a lot to this study, but I'm just giving you a summary of it. In 130 of the 800 villages, the average productivity was 82 quintals per hectare. And today, and this Kalpagam helped me to get these figures. Today the maximum yield, correct me if I'm wrong, the maximum yield is, maximum, not average, is 65 quintals per hectare in irrigated lands and 49 quintals per hectare in well irrigated land. So how does this compare? 82 quintals per hectare in 130 out of the 800 villages. And there is an even better average which still exceeds the average today. So now, how do you explain these kind of phenomenal yields? This is not like fertile river areas with alluvial soil. It's all tank irrigated. It's like moderate fertile, moderately fertile. And the explanation, the proposed explanation, is really very interesting. And please just remember that he says possibly what explains this productivity is that of the 54, for every 54,000 hectares that was being studied, 26,000 hectares is covered under irrigation and 18,000 is forest. So there was nothing that was happening on the farm that was so special to explain that productivity. The answer is what is happening around the farm and the fact that so much water is being conserved, and there is so much of forest land around the farms. And this definitely has, so it shows that farming was not seen as something isolated, and this is one of our limitations today when we only look at what is happening on the farm and not what is happening around. And this brings me to the subject of the landscape ecology. I told you that the crop diversity was one of the main tools that farmers had, that was a characteristic of Indian agriculture to deal with climate change. The second was that farming was not seen in isolation and was seen as part of a landscape and a landscape ecology. We all know this is Kanjivaram district, if I'm not wrong, and this district, in fact, I found dug out a very old map which from when the Survey of India first started from 1860 something, but that is available in a US Army map. I don't know how they got it, but it shows the entire Kanjivaram district from 1861. Very fantastic map where you see all the water bodies, and if what strikes you when you look at that map, I wish I had a picture to show you next time, but if you try to actually take all the blue things and put it together and leave all the brown parts separate, I think that the impression you get is that the water is more than 40 or 50% of the land. So that is something which also explains why this land was productive, because water is the staff of life. Without water, life doesn't exist. And in these areas, I think the rainfall figures are the same. There's about 1200 to 1300 of rainfall per year, and sometimes 1/4 of that falls in one day. That's the kind of intense rainfall that we get. So in that one day when all the rain falls, like it pours down, people have to do something to collect it, because the rest of the time, and it rains only 40 to 50 rainy days in a year, the rest of the time it's all dry. So human life, the continuation of society and civilization, everything that happened comes from the ability to preserve water and to make it useful for human consumption and the growing of crops. So you have to then cultivate crops with the stored water. And traditionally there are 47 kinds of water bodies that are named and described in the old texts. 75,000 tanks, these aeries, were there in the Madras presidency. And I think in large parts of Karnataka and Telangana too, life was made possible because people they created these fantastic engineering marvels to preserve the rainwater when it fell. It was a system of interlinked tanks from the top of the watershed to the bottom. They had a perfect idea of this concept of watershed, how water drains over a basin, how it flows, and the location of the tanks were very strategically placed. And the bunds were made in such a way that they would not breach, semicircular bunds. If you still look at Google, you will identify all the tanks. Unfortunately, all of these have fallen into disuse. Many of them have been encroached and built over, and many of them have become garbage dumps. In cities, the tanks don't exist. Even in semi-rural areas like mine, the areas don't exist. It's all finished. The whole system is over, which is a really tragic thing, because pretty soon we're going to run out of groundwater too. Especially in coastal areas, the salt water is going to intrude, and this is going to be a big problem. So, looking at the whole landscape, not only farming and what crops you grow, how you manure your crop, but what happens all around, how to preserve water, how to preserve forests, because the relationship between forests and water is actually, you can't separate the two. In fact, many of you are from Tiruvannamalai, the work of the forest way. During the time of Ramana Maharshi, there was the barren, Arunachala was a barren hill. Now it's a green place thanks to all the work of so many people. It's a very green hill. But if you look at in the 7th century, there was this poet Sambandar who traveled to many of the Shaivite shrines, and he composed these hymns, Tevaram hymns. So in one of those hymns, about the temple, Tiruvannamalai temple, the description is of a hill which is glistening like a green sapphire. It's glistening like a gem, and talk about cascading waterfalls. Just imagine the ecological health of that region at that time. Now, how the change happened, I don't have time to go into it, but that's a different story which I will share another time. Much later, after this, I told you, after the Suez Canal opened, there was a very big push to introduce cash crops. So things like tobacco, indigo, then groundnut was also introduced. Groundnut, by the way, is an introduced crop. It's not an indigenous crop. It was introduced, although we have embraced it like an indigenous crop, which is actually fine. And so to continue, like that productivity of Chengalpet land, which was from the 1760s, yeah, by 1870, 83% of that land all around was converted into cash crops. So there were no forests anymore, and ever since then productivity is declining, because what happens around the farm really actually it contributes to what is going on in the farm. All this diversity of crops, we're going to hear more about it. All of that came to an end with the Green Revolution. Although people like Volcker and later Albert Howard, who came to India in the 1920s, in 1924, he wrote many books, and he was also sent to improve Indian agriculture, to suggest ways to pull the peasant out of this primitive agriculture. So even he managed to stall the process of improving and industrializing agriculture. Although by then, in all other sectors, the steel manufacture, the textiles, the effect of the industrial revolution that came with colonialism, that had already had its impact. And in fact, our whole area, the Auroville area, became a desert because of deforestation during that time, because a steel factory was started in Parangipete to produce industrial quantities of steel to build the railways, So in agriculture, that kind of transformation from this type of ecological farming to an industrial production, that was stalled thanks to people like Albert Howard and Volcker and all, who kept feeling that no, we shouldn't do this. Finally, after independence, the story of the Green Revolution you can read about from Dr. Vandana Shiva, and the architect of the Green Revolution passed away recently, M.S. Swaminathan. There was an article, a very strong critique of the Green Revolution written by Claude Alvarez. you could read that. It's called The Great Gene Robbery. So it's essential to understand this whole thing of how modern agriculture turned into something totally different. And we are very much grappling with the problems that modern agriculture has caused. What was this change? This change was they introduced crops which had high yielding potential with chemical inputs. They were not high yielding as such, but they had the ability to produce because of the chemical inputs. And the whole all of traditional diversity which came from this ecological context was slowly over the years replaced by commercial varieties, which focused only narrowly on yield and not on climate adaptability or unique field conditions. None of those priorities exist in modern agriculture. In fact, the nature of plant breeding itself has changed so much. Like earlier, the people they were trying to build a population of like healthy plants. They worked on a population. I want to tell you one small story about this, how people saved seeds. There was a very conscious and active process of selecting seeds for that quality. So if you want to keep the paddy variety grown in the tank, you will collect seeds from that condition, not from some other condition. If you want to preserve, a 90-day or 85-day ragi variety, you will select yearheads which will mature in 85 days. You're not going to just harvest the crop and keep one portion for seed. You're going to make a conscious effort to preserve that quality which you want. And Bernard, very near to where I stay, now there is no agriculture, there's a highway there, but he saw a field there and he described what he saw. He said that there was a ragi field where the yearheads were maturing, and he said that a group of children came and they went into the field and they started collecting things and they were playing and collecting things, and they brought all those things, not everything, just some here and there, and they brought everything and put it on a bed sheet. And after some time, an old lady came to that bed sheet and she took from those certain things and she put that aside as seed. Now, we may think this is just a game, but this is a very important scientific step. There's certain criteria with which the children have gone and collected those earheads, and definitely something in mind where the old lady had when she picked out some from that. It's 2 levels of selection. So very conscious effort to select, and not just one plant. All of modern breeding is Mendelian. It tries to breed pedigrees. It doesn't try to develop a population which is resilient, a plant population which has this wide genetic base. It works to develop pedigrees, which is a very narrow genetic base, and that's the reason why climate change becomes a problem now, because we have outsourced that scientific work of developing plant varieties, outsourced it to companies whose only priority is profits. It's not a priority for them to develop varieties that will withstand cyclones or some variety that will not lodge. It's not their priority. They want to develop a pedigree which will yield in certain given conditions. And with this, I would like to end. So when with the conservation movement, we have to be very conscious. I'm being critical of my own conservation work. We have to be conscious that apart from there is a very important role to collecting diversity before it vanishes. But what is more than that, we need to re-establish that meaning behind the variety. And for that, we need to re-establish the creative connection that people had with the world of plants. That is what we need to re-establish. And I think we are ready for, actually as a species, to redefine our relationship with the natural world. That seems to be something that is the most important need of today. Thank you.